I'm Chongqing Lei from Southeast University. It's my pleasure to be here to present our work. Do not give a dog bread every time he wags his tail, stealing password through content queries attack. My presentation is divided into 5 parts. So first, I will briefly introduce the background. The Android Accessibility Service provides user interface enhancements in assisting users with disabilities in using Android devices. For example, Live Transcribe can provide real-time speech-to-text conversion for the deaf and hard of hearing users. And Google Talkback can convert UI status to voice and read the screen for the visually impaired users. Overall speaking, Accessibility Service provides Android apps with 2 basic functionalities. First, it allows apps to get the status of the target UI. For example, an app can use Accessibility Service to get notified when the user presses a button in another app and convert such action into voice feedback. Specifically, the UI status feedback is encapsulated in accessibility event objects. Accessibility Service also allows apps to control target UI status. For example, an app is able to automatically click the login button inside another app using the Accessibility Service. And any Android app can use these 2 functionalities if they are granted with the bind Accessibility Service permission. However, due to design flaws, the Accessibility Service can be exploited by malware to power various attacks. Luckily, these attacks are all patched by Google or other vendors. So, is Accessibility Service really secure? Unfortunately, the answer is no. Actually, we find that there's a novel query-based side channel in the Accessibility Service that can be exploited. Our attack exploits an API called Find Accessibility Node Infos by Text, which is typically used to locate UI components containing specific strings. This API should be invoked on the target UI component and takes a string as a pointer. The given string will then be searched in the target UI, and a collection of UI components containing the given string will be returned. For example, if we invoke the API on the left window with the pointer sign in, then the login button with the text sign in or register will be returned. Based on this functionality, we can achieve automatic login or password autofill. This feature also makes us wonder what will happen if the password happens to contain the given string. So we decided to give a try, and the result is surprising. The UI component representing the password input box will also be returned. For example, if we invoke the API with the string 13579, then the password input box is returned. This means that we can query whether a password contains certain strings. So can we exploit this? And the answer is yes. It turns out that the API has provided a query-based side channel which is vulnerable and can be exploited. If we incrementally query one character at a time, then the password can be cracked in linear time. For example, we first search the string 1 and the password input box is returned, and we have to know that 1 is in the password. Afterwards, we enumerate all characters and search the string 1-2, and nothing is returned, which means 1-2 is not in the password. However, when we continue to search the string 1-3, the password input box is returned again, and we can determine that 1-3 is in the password. So, based on this observation, we propose the content queries attack, aka Conquer attack. We make 4 assumptions for our attack. First, we assume that victims have installed the malware on their Android mobile devices, and they have granted the malware the Accessibility Service permission. We believe these 2 assumptions are reasonable because many popular malware are using Accessibility Service, and users usually grant such permissions blindly if they wish to use the app. We also assume that victims are using the latest Android phones, and they have turned off the Make Passwords Visible or Show Passwords option, which make existing attacks ineffective. Now I will introduce the basic workflow of Conquer. The malware first registers for the Accessibility Service to receive intended accessibility events from the victim app. Then, when the user enters the password, the malware will get notified by incoming accessibility events sent by the victim app. And the malware will then determine user actions based on the type of the event. If it determines that the user enters the password, the malware will enumerate possible combinations to infer that character as introduced earlier. This process is repeated every time the user enters a character. Finally, when the user hits the login button, the malware gets notified and determines that the user has finished entering the password. And at this point, the malware has successfully stolen the user's password. However, while the attack is theoretically easy to deploy, it still faces various challenges in practice. And to be more specific, there are at least 3 challenges we must overcome to successfully launch Conquer in real-world scenarios. The first challenge is to differentiate passwords and content descriptions. So Android apps can use the Android content description attribute to describe the meaning of UI components. However, the problem is the API not only searches the given string in the password text, but also in the content description of the password input box. For example, if the password is Ethernet and the content description is enter, then the API will return the password node if we search the string ENT. That means when a query succeeds, we're not sure whether the string is actually contained in the password. To solve this challenge, we propose the lazy query algorithm. The intuition behind this algorithm is that content descriptions are usually short phrases with few characters. If the query on the character that is not in the content description succeeds, we know for sure that this character must be in the password, and we can get the rest of the password normally. Therefore, we only query characters that are not in the content description first. If the user enters a character that's in the content description, it's ignored. And once we obtain the first match, we can recover all these ignored characters by enumerating all characters that are in the content description again. Now let's continue with the example. With lazy query, we will ignore the characters when the user enters E and T because they are in the content description. However, when the user enters H, we obtain a match, and we can easily recover the ignored characters by performing queries backward. The second challenge is to break defenses enabled on victim apps. Accessibility events sent by Android apps may contain sensitive information, and attackers can steal this information by sniffing accessibility events. So to mitigate this kind of attacks, some Android apps just suppress every outgoing accessibility event when users are entering passwords. However, this mitigation happens to hinder our attack because we won't get notified by incoming accessibility events when user enters the password or submits the password. To break these defenses, we propose active query. We first locate the password input box to be queried, which can be achieved through debugging or reverse engineering. Then we can actively query for the current length of the password to see if the victim has already started entering the password. The third challenge is to recover passwords from case-insensitive strings. So the search performed in the abused API is designed to be case-insensitive, which is reasonable because users usually not hear the case of the letters when they try to locate a UI component using this API. However, being an attacker, this feature prevents us from knowing the exact password. And if we want to recover the original case-sensitive password, we have to enumerate all possible combinations, which is not practical under normal cases because many apps will just block accounts after several failed login attempts. Intuitively, it may take the users longer to enter the next letter if they switch between upper and lowercase letters. Therefore, to resolve this challenge, we first propose to exploit a temporal side channel to detect case switches. The basic idea is that if the relative time interval between two letter inputs exceeds a predefined threshold, we determine that the user has switched case. And to find such a proper threshold, we select a threshold that maximizes the product of the true positive rate for detecting case switches and the true positive rate for detecting non-case switches. To make the model more robust, we only consider time intervals between two letters input when calculating the relative time intervals, because keyboard switches will also result in longer keystroke intervals, which is hard to distinguish. However, the temporal side channel-based model is not effective at recovering finer-grained keyboard state. The first problem is that it is not capable of identifying normal key switching and caps lock style key switching, because the temporal features of these two kinds of behavior are difficult to distinguish. The second problem is that the time intervals between keyboard switches are ignored, and we cannot determine whether there's a key switch right after a keyboard switch. So to tackle the first problem, we build a state machine to model the keys of the next letter to be entered, which we refer to as the key state. And the state machine is a NFA and consists of three states. The lowercase state models the normal keyboard state. In this state, every letter is assumed to be in lowercase. The switching state models the keyboard state after the shift key is pressed. And in this state, only the next letter is assumed to be in uppercase. The uppercase state models the keyboard state after the shift key is pressed twice. That is a caps lock. And in this case state, every letter is assumed to be in uppercase. But as we don't know the initial keyboard state, the initial state of the state machine is also non-deterministic. So the state machine may produce multiple possible passwords. To address the second problem, we introduce a state forking mechanism for the state machine. Every time the user switches to letters keyboard, we create 3 copies of the current password with 3 different key states to enumerate all 3 possibilities. We also perform theoretical analysis on the maximum number of recovered passwords under this model, and the number of passwords is highly related with the number of keyboard switch and key switch. However, through our statistical analysis on the ROCU password dataset, the number of passwords is small in most cases. To evaluate the effectiveness and the impact of Conquer, we conduct real-world experiments. And in the first experiment, we instruct volunteers to install the provided malware and a victim app on their Android phones and enter the provided real-world passwords into the victim app. The case-insensitive password strings and input time intervals are recorded by the malware. However, we still need a threshold to recover these passwords. Therefore, we derive the switch detection threshold from the MobiKey keystroke dataset. And after this, with this threshold, we can recover the original passwords using the collected data. The selected passwords are representative and can cover most of the passwords in the dataset. They have at least 9 characters, and they have different numbers of key switch and keyboard switch. To evaluate the effectiveness of Conquer, we propose to use the one-time password recovery success rate as a metric, because in real-world scenarios, attackers generally only have one chance to steal user passwords. And as a result, Conquer can achieve an average one-time success rate of 64.91%. We also evaluated the impact of Conquer. Through manual verification, we confirm that all Android versions from 4.1 to 12 are subject to Conquer, which means that all password input box UI components provided by the system and apps using these components are vulnerable. Android apps may also use custom input boxes, so we implemented a framework to automatically detect vulnerable custom password input boxes using JetX and Suite. And with this framework, we scanned over 300,000 Android apps and found tens of thousands of apps that are affected by Conquer. So to conclude, we propose content queries attack, aka Conquer attack. This attack exploits a query-based side channel in the Android accessibility service. While the basic idea is straightforward, 3 challenges must be resolved to make the attack practical. And through our extensive evaluation, we demonstrate that Conquer can achieve an average one-time success rate of 64.91% in stealing passwords, and it has affected all Android versions from 4.1 to 12 and tens of thousands of apps. And you can find a demo of Conquer in this GitHub repository if you are interested. So that's the end of our presentation, and I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, so have you reported this to Android, and then I'm wondering what they say about these findings.
We reported this vulnerability to Google. However, they decided to not fix this vulnerability because first, they think this behavior is required for the accessibility service to function normally. And second, they think the security risks of granting this permission have been informed to users in an alert window, so the users should be responsible for their own behaviors. But we don't agree with this point because many popular malware exploit the accessibility service, and users usually just grant such permissions blindly.
I see.
Benjamin Conte, TH Code. My question is if you can derive a password if I would use a password manager. I think you need the interaction to derive it. Is that correct?
Yeah, but actually we can get a case insensitive version of the password if you use the password manager. And we discussed this in the paper, and it's like if you hit the login button, like about 100 milliseconds after the password is filled in by the password manager, then the case insensitive string can still be queried, but we don't have the timing information, so we're not able to recover the original password.